Good day to you, and thank you for your time. My name is Jadan Roseborough, and this is part 2 of my deep dive into the story of David. Now, I mentioned before that in order to tell any story, you have to go back and you have to tell the story before that. In order to tell that story, you have to go back and tell the story before that. And so I really started to look into the story of David and realized I had to tell the story of Saul. And that before the story of Saul, I needed to tell the story of Samuel. And in order to tell the story of Samuel properly, I needed to set up a prelude about the children of Israel in the book of Judges. And then I stopped right there at the book of Judges because I realized I was going to do nothing but continue to tell the story before the story, before the story, before the story, until I got all the way back to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to go a little further back than what I did last time, only to read you this passage of scripture, because at the end of part 1, I proposed this idea that the reason, or one of the many reasons why the children of Israel had fallen into the depravity that they had fallen into and had fallen so far into it, dealing with a civil war, dealing with people in a city who negated the hospitality principle, who were willing to do such evil things to strangers, was because of their leadership. And at this point in time in the nation of Israel, there were, of course, chieftains that ruled over tribes. But if there was any type of central leadership, any type of unity of leadership, it dealt with the priest. It dealt with the tribe of Levites, because it was the tribe of Levites' job, and it was their duty, and it was their responsibility to communicate the law of God and the word of God to the people. It was also their responsibility to offer up sacrifices on behalf of the people so that the sins of the people could be taken care of, could be forgiven, could be cleansed. And as I started to look back into the Old Testament, into the books that were before the book of Judges and 1 Samuel, which I'll be trying to cover a little bit today, I had to realize that I needed to look at their responsibilities. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8, I want to describe one of their key responsibilities, because I think I need to go into the Bible to help describe the Bible and to prove what I'm talking about. And so in verse number 8, it says, "If there arise a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, and between stroke and stroke, being matters of controversy within thy gates, then thou shalt arise and get thee up into the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. And thou shalt come unto the priest of Levites, and unto the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire, and they shall show thee the sentence of judgment. And thou shalt do according to the sentence which they of that place which the Lord shall choose shall show thee. And thou shalt observe to do according to all that they inform thee, according to the sentence of the law which they shall teach thee, and according to the judgment which they shall tell thee. And thou shalt do, thou shalt not decline from the sentence which they shall show thee, to the right hand nor to the left. And the man that will do presumptuously, and will not hearken unto the priest that standeth to minister there before the Lord thy God, or unto the judge, even that man shall die, and they shall put away that evil from Israel." So you have a basic description of the responsibility of the tribe of Levites, or even what a Levite's responsibility in general was. It was that if there was any dispute that arose that got further or rose higher than between two people, you were supposed to take that dispute before a Levite or before a judge, who more than likely was a Levite, allow that judge to listen to that dispute and do whatever that Levite or that judge told you to do. And it also let us know that if someone was not listening to the judgment that was handed down by those Levites, that it was lawful for that person to be put to death because they were being rebellious. And you needed to get rid of that evil, it called it, from within the nation. So you have this responsibility to not only judge the law, but administer the law and enforce the law, if we were going to talk about 3 different forms of or branches of government like we have in the American system of government. At this point in time, the Levites were not only the judicial branch, the legislative branch, but they were also the executive branch. They were the ones who would carry out the law in this purpose and in this way. Now, I would like to point out that this was not the only job that the Levites had to carry out. It was one of many jobs that they had to carry out, but this was a very important responsibility in which they were granted over the people to be judge, jury, and executioner in this type of way. But when you go back and you look into the book of Judges that we just covered in part 1, you don't hear about the Levites making any of those key decisions that were made by the children of Israel. You don't hear them legislating any of those decisions or explaining the law. You don't hear them enforcing the law. All of those things were handled by the children of Israel themselves. Everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. What was supposed to stop that was the Levites were supposed to step in and tell them what was right in the eyes of God. Now we have to wonder why they did not step in at this point in time and wonder why they did not handle their job. It's because they were being corrupted at that point in time. We don't know why, we don't know how, we just know that they were being corrupted and they weren't performing their duties or their responsibilities. Now, when we go into Samuel chapters 1 and chapter 2, with the first chapter, we're introduced to the character of Hannah, and we're introduced to the character of Elkanah, Hannah's husband, and Hannah is the mother of Samuel, and we're given the immaculate conception of Samuel. And we're shown this beautiful story of Hannah, which I want to dive into at some point in time, but I don't believe that now is the time. But one of the things that I would love for you to read in the first chapter in Samuel is the interaction between Hannah and between Eli. And Eli is the head priest of Israel, talking about another priest. And the interaction that is had between Hannah and Eli is not necessarily a good interaction. Now, while Hannah is in the temple of the Lord praying, because one of the things that we're told about Hannah is that she's barren and she hasn't had any children, and that she's praying to the Lord so that she can have a child. And she's doing it, it says bitterly, that she's praying to the Lord bitterly, and that she's praying without talking, and that just her lips are moving. So she's praying in her heart. And that Eli, the high priest of Israel, sees Hannah praying in this way, and the way that he responds to her is to tell her to put away her wine and put away her drink, and that she should not be in the house of the Lord drunk. And Hannah's response to Eli is that, I am not a daughter of Belial. I am not one of these people who has gotten drunk and come into the temple. I am praying bitterly before the Lord for a child. And then we see Eli tell her, or respond to her with some grace after that, and tell her that whatever she is praying for, that it will happen and that she should go her way. But when you look at the nature of the situation of this happening, you have to ask yourself, why does Eli believe that she is in the house of the Lord drunk? Why does Hannah feel like she has to tell Eli that she is not a daughter of Belial? The last time I went to church, or that I've been in a situation where people were praying around me or in any type of place of worship, there were many people around who were praying to themselves, praying in their hearts. And even if their lips were moving and their hands were raised, the last thing that I considered was that they were drunk. Why does Eli think that Hannah is drunk? Why does Hannah feel like she has to defend herself in the house of the Lord by saying she's not a daughter of the devil? This slang, this daughter of Belial. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, I want to show you the reason why. It says in verse number 12, now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial, and they knew not the Lord. Now remember, Eli is the high priest of Israel. It says, and the custom of the priest with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand, talking about a fork, and he stuck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought out, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Also, before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the men that sacrificed, give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. And if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desire, then he should answer, nay, but thou shalt give it to me now. And if not, I will take it by force. Wherefore the sin of the young men was great before the Lord, for men abhorred the sacrifice of the Lord. Now, it's describing a tradition that I kind of mentioned in the previous story about how the priests were provided by the Lord, or were literally fed by the Lord through these sacrifices that the people made. And that there was a special fork, it calls it a flesh hook right here, that was stuck into the sacrifice while it was cooking or while it was burning. And whatever was pulled out was supposed to be given to the priest, and everything that was left in there was given unto the Lord. But the sons of Eli, it mentions halfway through these verses, it says that also before the fat burnt, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, give flesh to roast for the priest, for he shall not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. Now basically what that means is that the sons of Eli wanted to do things their own way. So instead of following the law the way that it was given, and instead of accepting the provision of the Lord the way that it was supposed to be provided for them, they would go into the sacrifice before it would really start to burn and tell the people who were offering up the sacrifice, look, you need to give us this meat before it even starts cooking. And don't even let the fat burn off of it. I need that meat right now raw so that I can cook it the way that I want to cook it. And if the people denied them this because the sacrifice was supposed to burn, the sacrifice was supposed to do certain things, there were certain customs, there were certain rituals that were supposed to be held and that were supposed to be followed to a T so that person could be forgiven for their sins and they could be cleansed. If the people refused this of the priest would go in and take it by force from them. And we know, reading in Deuteronomy chapter 17, that the priests literally had life and death in their hands. They could literally pronounce someone to be put to death. And so because of the way that Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were acting, especially when it came to the sacrifice of the Lord, they were causing the people to abhor, which means to hate having to go and deal with this sacrifice, because they hated getting bullied in this type of way. They hated having to deal with these men, with these priests, with these leaders, with these judges that God was supposed to put over them. So they literally stopped following the Lord because of the priest. And now I want to skip down to verse 22, where we have Eli confronting his sons about how evil they were. It says, now Eli was very old and heard all that his sons did unto all of Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he said to them, why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. So it's showing us that all of Israel is not only complaining to the Lord, but they're also complaining to Eli to deal with his sons. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the people to transgress, which means to sin. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat with him? Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. So it's telling us how hard-hearted, which is a term that is used in the book of Exodus, talking about Pharaoh, how hard his heart was. And the reason why his heart was hardened is so that the Lord could show his power. It's showing us right here that the reason that the hearts of the sons of Eli was hardened is because the Lord would slay them to get rid of them. It says in verse 27, and there came a man of God unto Eli and said unto him, thus saith the Lord, did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father when you were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? He's speaking of Moses, plainly appearing to Moses, who was in Egypt and who was in Pharaoh's house. And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice, and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation? And honorest thou sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all offerings of Israel my people? Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the day shall come that I will cut off thine arm, and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thine house. And thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, and all the wealth which God shall give Israel There shall not be an old man in thy house forever. So this is God showing Eli the punishment for honoring his sons over honoring God. And it says, and the man of thine house, whom I shall not cut off from mine altar, shall be to consume thine eyes, and to grieve thine heart. And all the increase of thine house shall die in the flower of their age. And this shall be a sign unto thee, that shall come unto thee, thy two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas, and the day, and one day, they both shall die. And I will raise up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and mine mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine appointed forever. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left in thine house shall come and crouch before thee and beg before. And it just goes on to show how lowly and how much damage God is going to do to the house of Eli. But it lets us also know that God is going to raise up a priest who will do what God has in his heart. But one of the things that I would like to also show is that there's a man of God that came before Eli to tell him this. There's a prophet, because I used to believe that the prophets and the priests were the exact same thing, but they were not. The main reason why I used to want to believe this is because since Moses was a prophet, and he was also a priest, a Levite, I used to always consider those two offices to be held by the same person, but they were not. Now, the man that God is talking about rising up, or the priest that God is talking about rising up, is Samuel. Now, one of the things that Samuel has is the gift of prophecy. And that's what makes him the next most important biblical figure after Moses to come onto the picture, or to come onto the stage. And the stage is set because the priesthood is so corrupt. Not only are we given the picture of Eli's sons corrupting the sacrifice of the Lord, or taking whatever they want instead of taking what God gives, we're also given the picture that his sons are also laying with the women that come into the temple. And it doesn't tell us that they're doing this in a righteous way, but that they're abusing their office. They're taking advantage of people that are brought before the Lord into this high place. And that also lets us know that Eli's sons were sons of Belial. And that's the one thing that Hannah mentions while she's in the house of the Lord, is that when Eli accuses her of being drunk, she tells him, I'm not one of these daughters of Belial. I'm just bitterly praying before the Lord. And so when Eli is going around and accusing Hannah of being drunk, you have to realize that he's doing this because there are a lot of people in the house of the Lord right now who are drunk off of wine. And Eli's having to chastise these people in this type of way. But the reason these people are drunk in the house of the Lord, drunk off wine, is because of Eli's sons. So Eli is more apt to chastise other people harshly than he is to chastise his own sons. And when it comes to chastisement, Eli's sons aren't listening to him at all. Their hearts are hardened. But Eli still hasn't taken them out of positions of leadership, even though they're performing this evilness, this wickedness before the Lord. And even though they're causing the people, the nation of Israel, to hate coming to the house of the Lord. This makes me think of the modern day feeling towards Catholic priests and the way in which the Catholic Church has handled that situation. One of the main criticisms you see people mention with the Catholic Church is that they are not taking these priests who have done these things out of position. And one of the main reasons a lot of people have turned away from the Catholic Church is because of how the Catholic Church has handled these positions. They're not condemning their priests. They're not coming down hard. They're just covering it up. And if you need a modern day example for something that's going on in the Bible, not necessarily the same exact transgressions, but the same exact feelings from the general public, that's what I would liken it to. It's that because the people up top are not coming down hard on these people that are causing the people to sin, that are abusing people in lower positions, that are doing all this wrong, this wickedness, it is causing people to hate and to turn their back on the church. And in the book of Samuel, Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, are causing people to hate and to turn their back on the sacrifice of the Lord, or even coming before the Lord. And it's causing them to do whatever is right in their own eyes, mainly because they see the priest cannot be trusted. We see the priests are evil and corrupt and hypocritical. So it's not just that nameless priest that we're given an example of in Judges. We're shown that even at the highest points of the priesthood, because Eli is the high priest, and so when you have a high priest in the country, his two sons that are holding positions of priesthood at the main house of the Lord in Shiloh, they're supposed to be looked at as respected individuals. They're supposed to be the example of God that the normal people in Israel have. And they're not fulfilling their job. They're not handling their responsibility. They are not being good pictures that the Lord has put before the people. And because of that, it says that God is going to slay them. It says in one day, this prophet tells Eli, in one day, both of them will die. He says, but I will raise up somebody who will do what I want them to do, who is a priest that listens to my heart. And this person is Samuel. So now that we understand the prelude and everything that led up to Samuel, let's dive into the start of Samuel's career. So in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1, it says, and the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. I wonder why. And it came to pass at that time, when Eli was lied down into his place, and his eyes began to wax dim that he could not see, the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel lay down to sleep. Now, I know it feels like it's no big deal that the lamp of God went out in verse number 2. It was actually a huge deal. One of the responsibilities for the Levites was to make sure that the lamp of God never went out in the tabernacle or in the temple. And the lamp of God goes out on Eli's watch. Now, the lamp of God was supposed to represent the presence of God always residing in his tabernacle. So this symbol was supposed to be upheld by the priest. But Eli is laxing in his responsibility. And as we know, his sons are definitely laxing in their responsibility. It says in verse 4 that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. And he ran unto Eli and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and lay down again. And the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou dost call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went to lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood, and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant hearest. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, that at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. Now notice that as God is starting to talk to Samuel, and as Samuel finally realizes that it's God talking to him, to tell you the truth, we don't know if Samuel knows this is God talking to him. We don't know if that Samuel believes that this could possibly be a test by Eli. We don't know. It doesn't tell us that Samuel knows that this is God at this moment in time. But after God finishes talking to Samuel, as we're about to see, it really matches the prophecy that was given to Eli by that mysterious prophet from 1 Samuel chapter 2. It almost matches it word for word. But let's go back again into verse number 12. It says, In that day I will perform against Eli all the things which I have spoken concerning his house when I began. I will also make an end. For I told him, and once again it's speaking about previous prophecies, that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. Therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. So we have God repeating almost word for word the same thing that he told Eli in chapter 2 by that mysterious prophet. But now God is speaking this prophecy unto Samuel. And we have to realize that Samuel is still a little kid while he's hearing this prophecy being spoken from God about the high priest. And we know from verse 1 in this chapter that Samuel ministers unto Eli. When it says ministers, it basically means that he serves Eli. He's basically at his beck and call. He's the gopher around the office. He's the guy going and getting the coffee, doing all the little stuff. He's basically that little kid who is at service in the household. And he's learning this about the high priest. And God is saying this very detailed. And he's telling him why he's doing these things and what's going to happen unto Eli. It says in verse 15, and Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. It doesn't tell us Samuel went back to sleep. It says that Samuel laid there until the next morning, got up, and then handled his job. And it lets us know he was afraid to show Eli. So more than likely, he's avoiding Eli. He doesn't even want to talk to him about what he just heard. In verse 16, then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, here am I. And he said, what is the thing that the Lord hath shown unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee. Like, why? Do you see the way that Eli is responding to this child? We don't see any grace. We don't see any love. Eli goes, you better tell me what you just heard, because if you don't tell me, I hope all of the things that you heard happen to you. So we know Eli's not expecting a good word. There's no way that if there was a good word being expected that he would speak in this type of way to this child. He basically tells him, may it be worse for you if you don't tell me anything that's going to happen. We have Eli dealing with another person the same way he dealt with Hannah in chapter 1, being accusatory, being very wrathful, no grace, no empathy, just being mean. And it says in verse 18, and Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, it is the Lord, let him do what he seemeth good. Now we have Eli basically threatening Samuel with the wrath of God, Samuel telling Eli exactly what the Lord said, and Eli just going, it's God, he'll do what he's going to do. This response from Eli shows us why this judgment is coming down upon the house of Eli. It shows us how corrupted the high priest has become. Now, if you go and you look throughout the Bible and you look at the way that God talks to the children of Israel, you'll see a lot of prophecies like this, where God is telling the people about how, since you've fallen out of line with me, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to deliver you into the hands of certain people, and there's going to be famine and starvation. But then when you see the people respond to that with repentance, you'll notice that God doesn't necessarily go through with the punishment that he was just giving to them. He shows grace to the people. But Eli is responding to this with indifference. And it's showing us the way he looks at God as very indifferent. And this isn't a nameless priest that we have from Judges 19, 20, and 21. This is the high priest. This is the top of the top, the cream of the crop, looking at God with indifference. And he knows why God is doing what he's going to do and why the prophecy is being made the way that it's being made. And he's like, God's just going to do what he's going to do. But let's move on from that. In verse 19, it says, and Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did not let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan and Beersheba knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. So we have Samuel growing up. It doesn't give us detailed information about what's going on in Samuel's rise, but it does let us know how he's called, and it does let us know the state of affairs in Israel. And it does let us know that everybody knows that God has called Samuel, not just to be priest, but it also lets us know that he has established Samuel as a prophet. Now, one of the things that you might kind of assume is that because the Levites were called to be priests, they were also called to be prophets. And because if you read in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and you'll notice that, of course, Moses is a Levite, and Moses is a great prophet of God. He's also one of the head priests. So you would believe that Moses would be a Levite and be a prophet and be a priest. So therefore, all the other Levites must also be prophets. But you have to understand that the gift of prophecy and the priesthood are two separate things. But now we have another priest, just like with Moses, who also has the gift of prophecy as well. And everybody knows it. And we have God revealing himself unto Samuel. And it lets us know in the beginning of chapter 3 that the word of the Lord was precious in Israel, which means you weren't hearing a lot of it. God was not revealing himself to a ton of people at this time. And why was that the case? Could it have something to do with the nation being corrupted and the nation's priests being corrupted and people not wanting to go make sacrifices unto God and do the things that they were supposed to do, and the fact that they were falling out of line with God and falling out of the law? And why were they falling out of the law? It was because the priests were so corrupted. So you had this cycle that was going on that was leading people further and further away from God. No wonder the word of the Lord was precious, or when it means precious, it was rare. Though you finally have someone who has the potential to lead the nation back towards God, and that person is Samuel. Now, I want to go into a second I don't know if I would want to call it a horror story like in Judges 19, 20, and 21, but this would definitely qualify as a creepy campsite story, like someone would tell you at summer camp with the flashlight up to your face, and they would be using this voice right here to explain what we're about to read. So in 1 Samuel chapter 4, I'm just going to dive into it. It says, "And the word of Samuel came out to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines to battle, and pitched beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched in Apec. And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined the battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. And when the people were coming to the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us to today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us. When it cometh unto us, it may save us out of the hands of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring forth hence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubims. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all the Israelites shouted with a great shout, so the earth rang again." Now we see that the Israelites and the Philistines, one of their main enemies from now on in the Bible. If you've ever heard the term, or if you've ever been called, or have ever heard someone called a Philistine, they're not using that in a correct term. So the Philistines definitely don't get any great press in the Bible, which leads throughout all time for them not to get great press. But we see that the children of Israel gather together and do battle against the Philistines. And it lets us know that the Philistines slay about 4,000 of the children of Israel. And once this happens, that they come together and they go back into the camp and they start to ask themselves, why did this happen to us? What did we do wrong? Let's go and let's grab the Ark of the Covenant, because once we bring it before us, the Ark of the Covenant will save us from the Philistines. And once the Ark of the Covenant is brought before the people, the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, are with the Ark of the Covenant. And the people, once they see the Ark of the Covenant, let out a great shout. What does this all mean? What is the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant is basically, it's an artifact that holds within it certain remembrances of what God did for the people while they were in the wilderness. The Ark of the Covenant was made while the people were in the wilderness. It holds within it some things such as some manna, which is the bread that God called down from heaven. It has within it Aaron's rod that had budded, which means out of a rod, God caused flowers to grow from out of it. It has within it the tablets that hold the Ten Commandments. And it's supposed to be something that is very, very holy. It's a symbol of the holiness and the promises that God has made to the people. But the way in which the children of Israel are talking about the Ark of the Covenant, they're talking about it as if it is just that, a religious symbol. It is, but that religious symbol in itself has power. You never see them mention that God will save us. They say the Ark of the Covenant will save us. And even then, look at the people who are escorting the Ark of the Covenant. You have Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli. And if you remember, as we've been talking about these two, they were known as sons of Belial. Belial meaning sons of the devil. So you have these two sons of the devil escorting this holy artifact onto the battlefield. And now the children of Israel are believing that this is what is going to save them from the Philistines, that this is what's going to fix all of their problems. Not God, this holy artifact escorted by these corrupt men. And so much to where they get overly joyed by just the ark coming into their presence. And it lets us know in verse 6, and it says, "And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, What meaneth this noise of the great shout in the camp of the Hebrews? And they understood that the ark of the Lord was come into the camp. And the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God is come into the camp. And they said, Woe unto us! For where hath not such a thing been before? Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness." Now, if you look at the exchange from the children of Israel, the Hebrews, compared to the exchange by the Philistines, it's amazing the difference. The Philistines are talking about God, while the Israelites are talking about the Ark of the Covenant. And the Philistines are talking about God. Why? Because it says, "These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness." You talk about what God did in the book of Exodus, dealing with Pharaoh and dealing with all these plagues. And it said that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he could show his power. We see that not only did God show his power to the Egyptians with Pharaoh, but he also showed it to the Philistines out here in the land of Canaan. Now, if you go and you do some history on the Philistines, you'll notice that a lot of historians believe that these Philistines in the Egyptian culture were called the Sea People, because at a certain point in time, there are these people that are mentioned and described in the hieroglyphics as just being called the Sea People, people who came from the sea. They were just, how do you say, migrants who came up out of nowhere, and they were hard to conquer. They were hard to deal with. They were constantly raiding the lands of the Egyptians. And it mentioned that even the pharaohs had a ridiculously hard time organizing armies to go against these people. They were very militaristically advanced. They were known to use chariots on the battlefield. They had 5 different cities, and each of those cities had a king. But they were very good at unifying themselves into a military force whenever they needed to, and they would be very good at going out and fighting whoever they needed to fight. So even the Egyptians had a hard time dealing with these people, and now we have the Israelites dealing with these people. So we know that the Philistines had contact with the Egyptians, and so that's more than likely where they heard these stories about God giving these plagues onto Egypt. And they know for sure that this God is, or these gods as they think it is connected to the Israelites and connected to the Hebrews. So when they hear this great shout and they know what is going on, they realize, oh my gosh, like, this is the same thing that happened to the Egyptians. This is the same God that smote the Egyptians. But we have the Israelites not even referring to God. They're just referring to the Ark of the Covenant giving them power. It says in verse number 9 that the Philistines respond with this: "Be strong and quiet yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that ye not be the servants unto the Hebrews, as they have been unto you. Quiet yourselves like men and fight. And the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were smitten in the field that day. Every man went to his tent, and there was a very great slaughter. For there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. And the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. The very first day, the Israelites only lost 4,000 men. They brought in the Ark of the Covenant, mentioned how the Ark of the Covenant was going to save them. The very next day, 30,000 men they lost. It shows us how God is not to be trifled with in this type of way. How God is going to prove himself, and the way in which God proved himself and chastised his people. Now, when you go back and you look at the two prophecies that were made, one in chapter 2, one in chapter 3, God said, I will do something in that day where everyone who hears it, their ears will tingle. Now, I wonder how bad the ears of people were tingling when they heard that they lost 30,000 men in battle. When you go back and you look at Judges chapter 21 and you look at the amount of people that were slain in those battles, you'll notice that they were right around the same amount of people that were slain in these battles. But there was not 30,000 people slain in one day. That was over the course of a couple of days, dealing with a couple of different engagements. In one day, 30,000 people died. And not just 30,000 people died. It says that the Ark of God was taken. And not only was the Ark of God taken, but the two sons of the high priest in Israel were killed right there next to it. And it lets us know earlier that once this stuff happened, every man ran home to his own tent. Typically, when you're dealing with an army, especially an army that is suffering a loss, there's what is called a tactical retreat. And the reason why there is a tactical retreat is so that no one is just running around unorganized. There's a way that you can protect yourself while you're losing. People aren't just turning tail, dropping weapons, and leaving everyone uncovered. It's a way in which you can kind of minimize the casualties so you can regroup and attack again. But there is none of that that's going on right now. Everyone is turning around, tucking tail, and worried about their own selves. Every man ran to his tent. When you go back and you read the last verse in Judges, it says, in those days there was no king, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. The lack of organization and everyone looking out for themselves is how you see this battle ending. And it's more than likely why the casualties were so high. Whenever there's an unorganized retreat, the other army turns and looks at it as a rout. And what a rout is basically, we're going to take advantage of this situation. We're going to just kill off as many people as we're going to kill off. Since they're not protecting themselves, we're going to take full advantage of this. It says in verse 12, and then a man ran out of Benjamin, out of the army, and came to Shiloh the same day, with his clothes rent and with earth upon his head. And when he came, lo, Eli sat upon a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told it to the city, they all cried out. And when Eli heard the noise of the crying, he said, what meaneth the noise of this tumult? And the man came in hastily and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were dim that he could not see. And the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, what is done, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there have also been a great slaughter among the people. And thy two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken. And it came to pass, when he made mention of the ark of God, that he fell out of his seat backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy, and he judged Israel for 40 years. Not only is the ark of God gone, not only are the two sons of the high priest dead, but when the high priest hears the word that the ark of God is gone, he falls out of his chair and breaks his neck. It lets us know that Eli at this time was blind and it says that he was a heavy man. Now, when we talk about somebody who is blind, it lets us know he's blind because he's old. But why is Eli as heavy as he is? Now, it lets us know earlier that his sons are taking of the sacrifices before they're even cooked because they want to cook it their own way. And it lets us know, and if you go back and you read Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy, about the provisions that are provided by the priest, that the Lord provides them with just enough. Not overabundant, not too much, just enough. And we have Eli who is here, who is ridiculously overweight. Why is he ridiculously overweight? Doesn't necessarily give us a reason. But it's obvious that he's eating way too much. It's obvious that he's being gluttonous. And this is the high priest in Israel. It's showing us that not only is Eli not able to restrain his sons from doing wrong, he's not even able to restrain himself when it comes to his own diet. And this is what, like, when he hears about the ark of God, and it doesn't let us know, it says as soon as he hears about the ark of the Lord, that's when he falls out of his seat and breaks his neck. He has this expectation. He's not even sad when he hears about his sons dying. That doesn't cause him to fall. He's sad when he hears about the ark of the Lord. And it lets us know earlier that he was trembling when he thought about the ark of the Lord being where it was and being in the state where it was, that he was afraid for the ark of the Lord. And it even mentions earlier in this story that the Philistines say nothing like this is like them bringing the ark of the Lord to the battlefield. This is like, they never do this. And when the Philistines win, it's, I liken it unto when a football team, you have two football teams that come together to play a rivalry game. And at the end of the rivalry game, they they play it over a trophy, like the Great Oaken Bucket or any of those. You go and you look at college football, any of those games where they play a game for a trophy. And at the end of the game, you see the team running off the field with that trophy. But it's not like the Philistines just run off the field with the trophy. It's like they grab the mascot and they run off with that too. So then they take that mascot back to their own school and they throw it in the trophy case right next to the trophy. That's how much they're sticking it to the children of Israel right now. That's how bad of a defeat. And they're like rubbing their noses in it. It also lets us know that Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was having a child at the exact same time that this was happening. And her handmaidens are telling her that you should be glad because you're having a son. But when she hears about the ark of the Lord being taken and about her husband dying and about her father-in-law dying, she becomes bitter. And she names this child Ichabod. And then she dies. It says in verse 19, and the daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed for her pains that come about her. And about that time of her death, the women that stood by her said, fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because her father-in-law and her husband died. And she said, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. So we have the beginnings of this tragic or this creepy campfire tale. But then it doesn't just end there, because we have the ark of the Lord that was taken by the Philistines. And now we have to figure out, why does this become a creepy campfire tale? What goes on when they take this ark of the Lord? And so I'm going to dive into this, and then once I finish telling this, I'll be finished with this part. It says, and the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. And Ashdod was the holy city for the Philistines. It was basically where they had their temples, where they served their gods. And it says, when the Philistines took the ark of the God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. Now, Dagon was the head god for the Philistines. He was their head honcho. He was the one they offered their sacrifices to. And they were even known to offer child sacrifices to Dagon. That's how precious they were. Well, that's how precious they looked at Dagon. And as a matter of fact, you see that God tells the children of Israel while they're in the wilderness that was one of those things that they were never supposed to engage in, was child sacrifice. And because the nations that they were going to go into the land of Canaan or the promised land and get rid of, that was one of their main practices, was practicing child sacrifice. It says in verse 3, and when they of Ashdod arose early in the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head and both of the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold, and only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Therefore neither the priest of Dagon nor any of those that came into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashtaroth unto this day. Behold, the hand of God was heavy on them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coast thereof. So we see that they've taken the Ark of the Covenant, they throw it into their trophy case, which is basically the temple of Dagon. They go to sleep after partying, more than likely, and celebrating. They wake up the next morning to perform their rituals and their rites. And they see that Dagon, their god, the statue of their god, is fallen over before the Ark of the Covenant. And they had this statue hewed out of stone, and that it is fallen over and basically bowed down before the Ark of the Covenant. They think nothing of it. They set it back up. The next day, when they wake up again, the statue is fallen over. But not only that, but the head is cut off of it, and the two hands, the palms are cut off of it as well. And so now the Philistines start being a lot of creeped out, because nobody wants to even go into the house of Dagon. But it lets us know that it doesn't stop there. It says that God was sore upon the city. He was heavy on them, and he destroyed them. And it says he smote them with emerods. And when you think about emerods, it's another word for saying tumors. That God has given them tumors. Not only is he killing them, but he's inflicting them with disease. And not only in the city, but also in this place, in the surrounding areas, even into the coast. Because the Philistines were the sea people, they came from the sea. So they dealt with a lot of dealings and tradings on the sea. So even not only just the city, but also the suburbs are getting hit with this plague. Now, one of the things that the Philistines were afraid of when it came to the God that they were dealing with is that this is the same God that smote the Egyptians with plagues. Now it lets us know, and when the men of Ashtaroth saw this, they said, the ark of God of Israel shall not abide with us, for his hand is sore upon us and upon Dagon our God. And they sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be carried unto Gath. And they carried the ark of the God of Israel about thither. And so it was that after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a great destruction. And he smote the men of the city, both great and small. And they had emerods in their secret parts. So they all get together, the 5 leaders of the Philistines, the 5 kings. And they said, no, we got to get this thing out of this city right here. It's being heavy on our God. It's being heavy on the city. What should we do with it? And they're all like, let's just move it to this other city and we should be good. So they take it over there to the city of Gath, which one of the things that we know Gath is famous for is for that's where Goliath is from, David and Goliath. And when they get it to Gath, God is just as destructive as he was in Ashtaroth. And not even just, he's even more heavy upon the city, because it says he gives them emerods or tumors in their secret parts. So in their private areas, God is causing them to have tumors. God is killing them, and God is also causing them to have tumors in their private areas. And it says, therefore they sent the ark of God to Ekron, and it came to pass as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought the ark of the God of Israel upon us to slay us and our people. So this is such a big deal that it's not even an isolated incident to where only a few people know about it. No, everybody in the nation of the Philistines is hearing about what the ark of God is doing into the city of Akron, into the city of Gath, and to the city of Ashdod. And it says when they're bringing it over to the city of Ekron, the Ekronites get out there and they're like, nah, don't even try to bring that thing over here. We know what happened to the previous two cities. Y'all just bring this thing over here so you can kill us off. Ain't no way we're letting this city into our hands, letting this ark into our city. It says, so they gathered together all of the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it go again to its own place, that it slay us not and our people. For there was deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of the Lord was heavy there, and the men that died not were smitten with emerods, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So you have, once again, I said this was like a creepy campfire story because the Philistines thought they won a battle and that they killed off a bunch of the Israelites and that they stole their God away from them and that they could just toss it into their own temple and be good with it. But it's almost as if they invited an evil into their own city. God is not evil, but it's like they invited their own destruction into their own city. They brought this upon themselves. And then when they try to pass it around amongst each other, they're like, nah, we don't want any of that. As a matter of fact, let's call together another council and let's find out what we're going to do with this ark of God. And it even lets us know that while this council is going on, that God is still heavy upon them, giving them tumors and destroying them with plague. And in chapter 6 of 1 Samuel, it says, the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. So it's not like it was there for that long. It was only there for not even half of a year, a little bit over that. And they're already like, get this thing out of here. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the ark of God? Tell us wherewith we shall send it to its place. And they said, if ye send away the ark of God of Israel, send it not empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering. Then ye shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then they said, what shall be the trespass offering which we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden emerods and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistine. For one plague was on you all and on your lords. Wherefore ye shall make images of your emerods and images of your mice that mar the land, and ye shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hands from off of you, and from off your gods, and from off your land. Now, when they go and they get these diviners and these holy men in their land, they tell them to do this weird thing. They tell them to go and to make golden images of the emerods or the tumors that have been given unto them. And they also tell them to make 5 golden images of the mice that have been marring the land. Now, when we talk about the plague that is upon the Philistines, we would like to believe that it is just a sickness. But when it mentions the plagues that are in Egypt, it mentions that there are frogs that are coming out of the river, that there are mice and locusts eating the crops and devouring those things. And this is kind of what the plagues look like that are going against the Philistines. Now, what is weird is that their holy men tell them to make images of these things that are destroying them and that are hurting them, and to put them into the ark and return it back unto the Israelites. And I have to ask why, or anyone would ask, why are they being told to do that? Because they tell them that once you do this, then you will be healed. Well, when you go back and you look in the wilderness, and you look in, I believe it's Numbers chapter 21, There's an incident where the children of Israel are going through the wilderness and they're complaining to Moses, saying that, why did you bring us out here to die? You should have just left us in Egypt. And it says that God gets angry and he sends fiery snakes amongst the camp that are biting people and poisoning people and killing them. And so Moses creates this golden or this bronze serpent. He puts it onto his staff and he raises it up. And God says that anyone who looks upon this serpent will be healed. And it's a very weird story if you go back and you read it. But then later on in the New Testament, we have Nicodemus talking about Christ. And then Christ makes a reference to this same golden serpent. And he says, the same way the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man shall be lifted up. And then we go into the verse in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish and have everlasting life. This image of God making the people look upon the results of their sin so that they can be healed is a very interesting image. And it's one that we as modern day people don't really understand because we don't deal with sacrifice. We don't look at ourselves as sinful. We like to look at the world around us as doing things to us. But these ancient people understood this terminology, this symbolism of looking at what you did wrong and the results of it so that you will not do that wrong thing again. And it lets the Philistines realize, it's almost as if they've learned this lesson, because these stories were not just told to the Israelites. These stories were passed around. So the same way as how they know the stories about what happened in Egypt, they are hearing these stories that have happened to the Israelites, and they are figuring out ways in which to deal with the Israelite God so that they can please him in the same way that they have been trying to please their own God, Dagon. But the way that they are going about this is, it's pretty amazing, because they are dealing with God in a way in which the children of Israel are not even dealing with God. They're trying to figure out what works with God so that they can please God in that way. And they are showing their humility by showing God or making images of things that are hurting them, the same way Moses made this bronze snake and held it up in the wilderness, and everyone that looked upon it was then healed from the bites of whatever snake that was biting them. They're doing the same thing with God right here. In the same way that we are supposed to look upon Christ, who, when Christ is risen up on the cross or raised up on the cross, he's covered with the sins of the world. And then when you kneel at the foot of the cross and you look upon your sin that was upon Christ, and you look at the consequences of your mistakes being put about in this way, risen up in this type of way, it causes a sense of repentance. And then you are healed of your sins. The same way that these people realize, okay, I need to hold up these plagues that are before us. I don't need to have a hard heart the way that Pharaoh did, because when Pharaoh had this hard heart and refused to repent towards a God that was showing he was more powerful than they were, Pharaoh was destroyed, him and his people. If we don't want to suffer the same fate, we need to make sure that we don't do the same thing and that we recognize our mistake and then are healed afterwards. But it doesn't stop there, because it's not as if these people are totally faithful. But it lets us know in verse 6, it says, wherefore then do not ye harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts when he had wrought wonderfully among them. Do not let the people go. Did they not let the people go, and they departed? Now therefore make a new cart and take 2 milk kine, which is 2 female cows, on which have had no yoke, and tie the kine to the cart, and bring their calves home from them, and take the ark of the Lord, and lay it upon the cart, and put the jewels of gold which ye return for a trespass offering in a coffer by the side thereof, and send it away that it may go. And see if it goeth by the way of his own coast to Beth Shemesh, and he have done us this great evil. But if not, then ye shall know that it was not by his hand that smote us, that it was a chance that it happened. And the man did so, and took 2 milk kine, and tied them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. So the Philistines are like, okay, good. We're going to go through this and we're going to do this in this type of way, but let's make sure that this was not a random chance. So they show a little bit of faith, if faith is what it is, but they also want to test things scientifically to make sure that this is what is really going on. So they take two female cows that have just had babies. So that means they're still milk kind, means they're still the babies or the baby calves are still drinking milk off of the mother, so they're still tied together, as in they still have this connection between mother and calf. These cows have never had any yoke put upon them, which means they've never been tied to a cart or been taught how to do this. And they're going to tie them to the cart or put a yoke upon them, put the Ark of the Covenant on the back of the cart, put a coffer or a chest beside it with the mice and the images of the tumors that have been placed upon them. And then they're going to just let this cart go on its way. There's going to be no one directing it. They're just going to let it go. They've taken the calves that the cows have had and they put them away in a certain area. And then it lets us know, because I'm not going to read on so far on this one, I'm going to read at the very, very end of this, that if this thing goes the way that it's supposed to go without any direction from anyone else, we'll know that it's God. But if it doesn't, it was just a random chance, and that's the only reason why these plagues came upon us and these mice marred the land and we had these tumors growing within us. But let's go ahead and test this out. And it says, and the kine took the straight way from Beth Shemesh and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside from the right hand or the left. So it lets us know these cows did exactly what they were supposed to do, which means they went right to Beth Shemesh, and it says they were lowing as they went. So they were still crying out for their babies, but they did what they were supposed to do without any direction from anyone else. So the Philistines knew that it was God. Now, without me reading, I know I've said that many times, but this time I'm actually not going to read. Once this cart gets to Beth Shemesh like it was supposed to, the men of Beth Shemesh are out in the fields and they're reaping their harvest. And when they see the cart, they know that it is the Ark of the Covenant, and so they rejoice. And the sad part, they take the cows and they take the cart and they break the cart down into firewood, and they take the cows and they sacrifice them unto the Lord. And it says they get some Levites to do this sacrificing to them so that they can have this happen in this way. The lords of the Philistines notice what's going on. They realize, hey, this is just God, so let's just leave it alone. And they leave. But it lets us know that, because this is when you would think the campsite story was over. Like, if you've ever seen the music video for Thriller, like Michael Jackson comes out at the very end and he asks the girl, oh, what are you afraid of? And she's, oh, I was afraid. And then, they walk out of the house. But then at the very end of the video, he turns back and he looks at the camera and his eyes are all yellow. And you have that creepy, evil laugh going on that, every single camp story ends on a cliffhanger. Well, typically you would want this story to end here, where the Ark of the Covenant is returned, everybody is happy, but it tells us at the very, very end of this chapter that the men of Beth Shemesh looked into the Ark of the Covenant. And because they look into the Ark of the Covenant, 50,000 people are slain in Beth Shemesh. Now, we know that the mice and the images of the tumors, the golden mice and the images of the golden tumors or emeralds, are in a coffer that is beside the Ark of the Covenant. So the Philistines aren't even dumb enough to open up the Ark of the Covenant. They know better than to do that. They put it on a cart, they let it go. Now when the cart gets where it's supposed to go and the sacrifices are made and everything, the men of Beth Shemesh let the curiosity get a hold to them or get the better of them, and they open up the Ark of the Covenant, and God destroys 50,000 of them. That's the part of the story where Michael Jackson looks back at the camera and the eyes are yellow and the creepy laughter happens. And it lets us know that the men of Beth Shemesh go, who can deal with this great God of Israel? You know what? Let's go they get somebody, they consecrate him, and they send the ark over there because they want nothing to do with it. And it tells us that the Ark of the Covenant stays in that place for another 20 years after this incident. So we have God being returned to the children of Israel, and it shows us that even though the Ark of the Covenant is brought back, that these people still have no respect for God. And so they pay dearly for their lack of respect. And for us, we might look at this as harsh as, why did God kill 50,000 people?
Don't even go in there. Don't even be safe about it.
We have to realize that there's some things that you just don't do.
Don't even touch it.
There's some things that you just don't touch. There's certain lines that you just do not cross. Because then that makes you just as bad as an enemy of God. Now, when we get into the story of David, we'll notice that there's a period of time when the Ark of the Covenant is brought back into the city of David. And there's a man named Uzzah who the Ark stumbles and trips off of a cart. And he goes and he tries to catch it before it hits the ground. And it says that when he touches the cart, that God strikes him dead.
Started getting this in the morning.
And David is afraid because of this. He doesn't bring the Ark into the city. He takes it to another place and kind of does exactly as the men of Bethshemesh do. They consecrate somebody, which means they make somebody holy so they can get around the Ark and to deal with it.
But I already got like a blanket.
And that's kind of it for a little bit. Later on, David actually brings it into the city. But he's upset because God killed Uzzah. It's either Uzzah or Uzziah. I don't know how to pronounce it totally. But even though Uzzah or Uzziah had the best of intentions by trying to catch the Ark of the Covenant, there's a term where it says good intentions pave the way to hell. So it doesn't matter how right you are trying to be. If you are going against what God is saying, if you are going against your responsibility to God, if you are blatantly disobeying God, it doesn't matter how right you are being. There will be judgment that falls upon you. And sometimes you don't even want to deal with that judgment. Sometimes that judgment can be so harsh. But there are consequences to our decisions. And I want to end right there. Because as we've been dealing with this part, we've seen the rise kind of Samuel and the beginning of his career. And we've seen the death of Eli and his sons. We need to realize that Samuel is about to bring about a reform to the priesthood. And in order for this reform to happen, the past has to literally die. And that past is Eli and his sons. And that past is the old way of the priesthood. And that past is the people who have not been following God or doing what they're supposed to be doing, realizing the nature of their sin. And even though they have been doing what is right in their own eyes, they have had the best of intentions, those intentions have not been God's intentions. And the nature of the children of Israel, if we have to liken them unto a human experiment, is what do you get when you have a people who do what is not right in their own eyes, but what is right in the eyes of God? What do you get when you have a people who follow the law of God in such a specific way that has been laid out before them, has been written down, has been instructed and directed? What do you get when you have a people who do this? You see this many times over in different parts of the world and so many different factions. The Mongols, what do you get with a group of people who learn to ride the horse before they can even walk, and who learn to use this compact bow and live on the Eurasian steppe and are constantly fighting and warring with each other, but are building this hardened type of person that constantly clashes with the civilization of China? What do you get when you have a group of people that is built and raised like this? With the nation of Israel, we are getting the same thing. What do you get when you have a people who follow this one God and are supposed to follow along his ways in this way and are very specific with what makes them holy and what makes them unholy, what makes them clean, what makes them unclean, what is the sin which is missing the mark, and what is causing them to fall out of line with God? Even when they suffer defeat, they go back and they say, what did we do wrong? They don't go back and they say, God has forsaken us, God isn't doing us right. They ask, how are we not following the law? Because when we don't follow the law, these certain things have been prescribed to us. What do you get when you have a people that is like this? And after, or I should say next, we'll discuss more of this. And hopefully we'll get closer to the story of David. Thank you for your time. My name is J.Dan Roseborough. And once again, this is a deep dive into the story of David. I know I'm telling the story before the story before the story, but I pray that you bear with me. Have a good day.